First of all, I would like to welcome you all to this module on gender equality and media. This is basically the fourth module of the MOOC course on gender and the media. And in this particular unit, this is unit 11 of the fourth module, this is on gender equality. So, in this unit, we shall try to analyze the meaning of gender equality, the concept of gender empowerment measure index, and what gender inequality is all about. Now let us try to understand what gender equality is. Now before diving deep into the meaning of gender equality, let us try to know what gender is all about. Now to a layman, gender it refers to the social, behavioral and cultural attributes, the expectations and the norms that are associated with being a woman or a man. And gender equality it refers to a state where the individuals of all genders, they have equal rights, they have equal responsibilities as well as opportunities in all areas of life. So what does it mean then? It means that a person's gender does not determine their access to resources, opportunities, or even how they are treated in the society. In other words, gender equality seeks to eliminate the systemic barriers that permeate or that perpetuate the discrimination and imbalance. Now let us try to look into the different principles of gender equality or what constitutes gender equality. Now when we talk about gender equality, the first thing that comes to our mind is equal access. That is, everyone regardless of gender, sex, caste, creed, they should have the same opportunities in education, in employment, in healthcare, in decision making and so forth. There should be equal accessibility. There shouldn't be any kind of biasness or any kind of inequality prevailing. Second important principle or a component is equal treatment. Now gender equality it ensures that people are treated fairly. It should be fair and just without any kind of bias. Whether that particular treatment is at home, at workplace or in any other public life. The third important principle is equity and fairness. Now when we talk about equity and fairness, what do we mean by that? While equality focuses on providing the same resources, equity recognizes that some individuals may need more other additional support in order to achieve fairness due to historical disadvantages. Then we have shared responsibilities. Now, sharing the responsibility is also one of the primary principles of gender equality. Now, gender equality challenges the traditional norms, promoting shared roles in caregiving, in household duties, and even in leadership. Then we have empowerment. Basically, empowerment is also one of the prime principles of gender equality. Now, when we talk about empowerment, basically it focuses on empowering the underrepresented genders, especially women and girls, in order to overcome the different systematic barriers and take part in all the different aspects of society equally without any kind of biasness. Now, why we are giving so much of emphasis on gender equality? Be it at workplace, at home or in any other public life. People are subjected to some form of inequality to a certain extent. And when such things prevail, it has a profound impact on the society. So if we want holistic development to take place, we should ensure that both male and female, they should have equal rights. That's where gender equality matters the most. The first is human rights. Now, we all all know gender equality is a fundamental human right, because everyone deserves to live with dignity, and there should be, he or she should be free from any form of discrimination, whether the discrimination is at home, whether the discrimination is at workplace, or whether that discrimination is at any public life. The second important factor of why we are giving so much of emphasis on gender equality is economic benefits. Societies that promote gender equality, it experiences higher economic growth and development due to the inclusion of diverse perspectives and talents. The third is social progress. Gender equality fosters a more healthier, a better equitable society, thereby reducing poverty and improving the overall health and well-being of an individual. The fourth important aspect on why we are focusing so much on gender equality is because it leads to sustainability. Gender equality, when you talk about, it is very much essential for achieving the global goals, like that has been mentioned in the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG number 5, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which states that to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Ultimately, that leads to sustainability, right? So, now the question that arises is like, do gender equality actually matter for development? How can it lead to sustainability? How can it lead to development of the society? First and foremost, gender equality definitely matters a lot. It matters intrinsically because the ability to live the life of one's own choosing and be spared from absolute deprivation is a basic human right. And that should be equal for everyone. Second important point is that gender equality matters instrumentally. Why? Because the greater the gender equality, the more it contributes to economic efficiency and the achievement of other key development outcomes. And gender equality matters in its own right. Now, we see development as a kind of process of expanding the freedom equally for all people. And in this view of development, gender equality is like a core objective in itself. So, just as development means less income, poverty, or better access to justice, it should also mean fewer gaps in well-being between both male and female. And this particular viewpoint is also evident in the international development community's recognition that women's empowerment and gender equality are development objectives in their own right, as has been mentioned in the Millennium Development Goal of number 3 and number 5. So, it is seen as well in the adoption and widespread ratification of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Now, when we talk about how gender equality matters, it is also an instrument for development. But does it lead to actually smart economies? When we talk about smart economics, what do we mean by that? How do the economy of the nation it function? How can gender equality actually lead to a better economy, a better economic condition? Now, gender equality is indeed very, it's a smart economics because it can enhance the economic efficiency and improve other development outcomes in 3 different ways. Okay. Firstly, what can it do? It removes the barriers that prevent women from having the same access as men to education, economic opportunities, and productive inputs. Secondly, Improving women's absolute and relative status feeds many other development outcomes, including those for their children, can be achieved. Thirdly, by leveling the playing field, where women and men have equal chances to become socially and politically active, make decisions, and shape policies, that is likely to lead over time, over a long period of time, to more representative and more inclusive institutions and policy choices, and thus to a better development path. That's why it says, when we push for gender equality, we're actually pushing the society towards development. We are actually pushing the society towards attaining economy efficiency. That's why gender equality matters a lot. It leads to smart economics. Okay. Now, gender equality can also have, huge impact on productivity. Now, women nowadays they represent more than 40% of the global labor force and 43% of the agricultural workforce and more than half of the world's university students. Can you imagine? That's a huge number. So for an economy to be functioning at its best, or for an economy to be functioning at its potential, the skills and talents of the woman should be engaged in other activities as well that make the best use of those abilities. When women's labor is underused or misallocated, now because they face discrimination in different areas, it prevents them from completing their education, entering certain occupations, and earning the same income as men. Economic losses are the result of it. And discrimination in credit markets and other gender inequalities in access to productive inputs also make it more difficult for female-headed firms to be as productive and profitable as male-headed ones. And when women are excluded, when they're removed from even from other management positions or from other managerial positions, managers are less skilled on average, thereby reducing the pace of innovation and technology adoption. Now, when there is gender inequality, it diminishes a country's ability to compete internationally, particularly if the country specializes in exporting goods and services for which men and women workers are equally well suited. That's why we are giving a lot of emphasis on gender equality. Now, let us try to look into some examples, or rather certain practices that are usually encountered as far as gender equality matters a lot. Now, where do you expect gender equality to take place? Where should it actually happen? What are the areas of concern? First one, we have, of course, education. In the field of education, when we talk about gender equality, it actually means providing equal access to education for both the boys and the girls. It shouldn't be that only the boys should be getting, full-fledged education, and girls are supposed to stay back at home or look after the family, do all the household work and all, so and so forth. Now, as far as education is concerned, it also means removing the barriers like child marriage or gender-based violence that prevents the girls from continuing their education. The second important area where gender equality is in practice is in the field of workplace. So at the workplace, when we talk about gender equality, it means closing the gender pay gap. There should be equal parity. Both the male and the female, they should be paid equally, irrespective of whatever position he or she is being put into. Someone is in a higher position, someone is in a lower position, then there is a differences in the pay package. That should be the norm. In fact, that should be closed. The gap should be closed to a larger extent. Then at the workplace also, there should be equal representation in leadership and decision making roles. Now, it is not only that the male, the man folk, they should be always be given certain roles like as leading the particular company or being given the leadership role in taking up certain projects. Even the women are also equally capable to lead up, to take up the lead, or to take up any crucial decision making, whether that is in the field of education, whether that is in the field of any multinational company, or whether that can be in the form of in any public sector organization or public sector or private sector organization as such. There should be equal representation as far as decision making role is concerned. Then health wise, when we talk about gender equality, it means ensuring access to reproductive health services for all the genders. And it also means addressing gender specific health issues and providing equal care. Then we have the legal rights. What does it actually mean? Now, legally, from a legal point of view, it means enacting and enforcing laws that guarantee equal rights to property, inheritance, and protection from violence. And when we talk about representation, that representation can be in any different field. It can be in the field of politics, it can be in the field of governance, in any other leadership roles as well. There should be more and more increasing presence of women and marginalized genders in all these different fields. So these are some of the practical areas that where we need to focus on, where we need to push the concept of gender equality, where we need to push the boundaries and make sure that each one of us are being given equal opportunity, equal accessibility to different functions. Now, while achieving gender equality, it's not something that can be achieved within a fortnight. It might take some time. Of course, the situation was very much different when I'm talking about like 20-30 years back. The situation was a little bit different. But now what happened, more and more women are coming to the field. More and more women are breaking the glass ceiling and achieving, different heights of success in different fields. But there are certain challenges which needs to be, looked into, which needs to be mitigated in the long term. Firstly, what challenges we can find out? We are surrounded with so much of cultural and social norms. There are deeply rooted stereotypes about gender roles. And those are mostly seen, especially those who are working at home. The mothers, the housewife, or maybe someone who has been, bound to look after the family instead of working in some other place. We have very stereotypical role. So that should not be. That should be done away with. Then another challenge is economic inequities. Women and marginalized genders have faced limited access to financial independence. That's very much true. Those people who are not in working position, who have to look after the family, definitely they're dependent on their partners. They're dependent on their spouses to support their family. They are not financially independent. They're dependent on their partners. And that kind of, makes them, a little bit, they're unable to come out of that particular cocoon. In fact, whenever they try to raise their voice, they are being put down. That should not be the norm, actually, and that should be done away with. Then we have lack of political will. Insufficient policy implementation to promote and protect gender equality. There are very few policies are there. And even if one or two policies which are available, it's very insufficient. And so we need to have more, very stronger policies should be in place in order to promote and protect gender equality. that another important challenge that we are seeing in achieving gender equality is gender-based violence. Violence against women, girls, and gender diverse individuals, it remains widespread. There is no change in it. So that needs to be looked into. Now, when we are moving towards gender equality, we need to keep certain things in our mind. The first is education awareness. Awareness must be generated. Stereotypes should be challenged. And inclusive attitudes should be promoted through education. And efforts also should be made to ensure equal rights and protection are being given for all the genders. So policies should be in place, policies should be implemented, legislation should be in place if we need to move towards a better gender equality measures. And then advocacy, grassroots movements, initiatives, those can be taken up that will actually empower the underrepresented genders. So overall, gender equality is not only about fairness, but it is also about building a stronger, more inclusive society where everyone has the equal opportunity to thrive. Right? Now, let us try to understand what gender empowerment measure is all about. That is GEM index. Now, gender empowerment measure index, this is an index that has been designed to measure the gender equality. And this index is the United Nations Development Programme's attempt to measure the extent of gender inequality across the globe's countries, different countries across the globe, based on estimates of women's relative economic income, participation in high-paying positions with economic power, and access to professional and parliamentary positions. GEM index, this was actually introduced in 1995 by the UNDP in its Human Development Report, and this GEM index was mainly intended to complement the Human Development Index, that is HDI. However, in 2010, what happened was the GEM index, it was replaced by the Gender Inequality Index due to some other shortcomings. And GEM, that is Gender Empowerment Measure, it evaluates the extent to which women are active participants in economic and political decision making in a society, in a country as such. And unlike the other measures that mainly focus purely on gender disparities, the GEM index, it specifically assesses women's empowerment and their ability to influence development outcomes. Now let us try to understand the different components of GEM index, that is Gender Empowerment Measure Index. Number one, we have political participation on decision making. It means the proportion of seats held by a woman in national parliaments or legislative bodies. Second component is economic participation and decision making. This means proportion of women in managerial, in professional or technical positions. The third important component what we have, control over economic resources. Now, women's share of earned income compared to men's. That is what control over economic resources is all about. When there is a comparison between what is the share of women's earned income as comparable to men. Now, how do we exactly measure the GEM index? How it is calculated? It's a very simple calculation. First, you need to calculate the percentage of men and women in each of these three areas. I have just mentioned the three principal areas. One is the political participation, economic participation, and then we have the control over economic resources. So you calculate the percentage. okay, in these three areas, then what do? You combine the percentage for each area into an equally distributed equivalent percentage, that is EDEP. Thereafter, you calculate the GEM as the average of the three EDEPs. That is, you calculate the GEM after making an average of the three EDPs, means political participation, economic participation, and control over economic resources. And usually the GEM index, it ranges from 0 to 1. And when we get the 1 index, it indicates full equality. There is full equality between men and women. And the index, it decreases as inequality increases. So higher GEM index or higher GEM score, it reflects that society where women have more significant influence in shaping the policy, in shaping the governance, and in the economic structures. And a lower GEM score, it indicates limited opportunities for women in leadership field, in decision making, and economic independence. Now, there are certain limitations of GEM as well. What are those? First point is, it doesn't account for unpaid work. That is basically who are into caregiving, who are working as domestic help, who are engaged in other domestic work. It doesn't account for those kind of unpaid work. Secondly, the measure focuses primarily on the formal economy and political structures, neglecting informal sectors or grassroots level of empowerment. And thirdly, this has been replaced by other broader indices like the Gender Inequality Index, which captures more dimensions of gender disparities, including reproductive health. And there have been many studies, and ever since this particular concept has been introduced by UNDP in its Human Development Report of 1995, many suggestions have been made, many recommendations have been given, many comments have been given to make certain alterations. So what suggestions they have given is that it has been suggested that the GEM be altered to include female representation at the local government also. Instead of only national government, it should be shown at the representation in the local government as well. Moreover, this has been recommended that it should be, revised to reflect female participation in political activities like voting rights. And additionally, it has been recommended that a component regarding women's control over their own bodies and sexuality be added by measuring the availability of birth control and the right to abortion. So whatever the case may be, whatever the consequences may be, the gender empowerment measure, it remains a valuable historical tool for understanding the importance of women's role in political and economic spheres. So, the third important component of this particular unit is on gender inequality. So far we have tried to understand what gender equality is all about, why we are pushing towards gender equality, what challenges can be seen in, trying to remove gender inequality and having a more, gender equal society where everyone has equal opportunity, equal access to education, to healthcare, or to any other aspect of life. And then we moved on to GEM index, this Gender Empowerment Measure Index. Now, we would like to talk about what gender inequality is all about. Now, gender inequality basically refers to the unequal treatment, opportunities, and access to resources or rights based on a person's gender. And this arises from deeply rooted social, cultural, economic, and political systems that often prioritize one gender over the others, leading to disparities and discrimination. Now, let us try to look at some of the key areas of gender inequality. First one is in the field of education. Women or girls, in many areas, in many regions, they face barriers to education due to different cultural norms, due to, of course, poverty also, maybe, or due to lack of accessibility. And such gender disparities are very much common in the field of science, technology, engineering, and other science-based courses. Second important field where gender inequality is mostly prevalent is in the field of employment and economic opportunities. Now, women often they earn very less than men for the same amount of work because there is gender pay gap is there. There is no gender pay parity. And women are underrepresented in leadership roles and overrepresented in low paying, informal, or unpaid jobs. Third important area where gender inequality is usually seen is in the field of political representation. Women are significantly underrepresented in politics and decision making. Now, the fourth important area where usually gender inequality is seen is in the field of health and well-being. There is limited access to healthcare services actually. If you take a look around the healthcare services, mostly in the underdeveloped countries, people have very less accessibility. So, top of that, when the female or the woman or the girls are being given limited access to healthcare, then that creates a lot of problem on their behalf. And gender-based violence such as domestic abuse, sexual harassment, and even trafficking, it disproportionately affects women and girls. The fifth important area where gender inequality is usually seen is at the household level, or mostly when it involves taking care of some other people. Women often they shoulder the majority of unpaid caregiving and domestic work. Which kind of limits their participation in the workforce or education. Then, of course, there are legal and cultural barriers as well. In most of the societies, laws and cultural practices, it restricts the woman's rights to own property, to inherit a wealth, or to make personal choices about marriage, work, and mobility. So these are some of the common areas where gender inequality is usually very much prevalent, is usually seen. And there are, of course, other causes of gender inequality as well. As you already talked about, there are gender stereotypes are there, cultural norms are there, there is lack of access to resources as well. And of course, there are institutional barriers. Okay, so these are some of the causes, some of the consequences, some of the areas where gender equality is very much prevalent. So, and girls and women mostly they suffer a negative impact of rigid gender norms and rules. They are more likely to have their freedom of mobility restricted. They are more likely to experience epidemic levels of violence and harassment. And if we look into some of the ways to address these issues, it's a long list. There has to be a proper planning in place. There has to be proper legal framework in place to protect against gender-based discrimination and violence, to promote equal access to education and challenging harmful stereotypes, and also to encourage women's participation in the workforce, in entrepreneurship, and also in other leadership roles as well. And when we achieve gender equality, it not only benefits the individuals, but it also creates more inclusive and prosperous society. So with this, we have come towards the end of this particular unit. We have tried to understand the meaning of gender equality, the concept of gender empowerment measure index, and gender equality. Thank you so much.